Since its beginning, nearly 80 years ago, Olympic Tent has been a leader in the special event tent industry. Olympic Tent strives to look for new ways to provide cost-effective fabric structures, tenting supplies, and equipment. Our goal is to save you time and money every time you set up one of our fabric structures. Throughout this DVD, we will provide simple, step-by-step instructions on how to assemble your Olympic Tent 40-foot wide gable end frame tent. The majority of the concepts and instructions are easily applied to tents of other sizes and other styles. If you have any questions regarding the installation, maintenance, or the dismantling of your tent, please call Olympic Tent at 800-481-4128. For safety reasons, Olympic Tent wants to remind the installer not to erect a tent during bad weather, and to please follow all safety procedures during the installation process. Particularly, assembled tents can act like large sails in windy conditions. Precautions must be taken during installation to avoid an accident. For example, an important safety reminder is to always tie off the frame before installing fabric tops. Please contact all utility companies for underground services. In many states, the utilities work together and have formed a utility location service. It is your responsibility to locate all underground services, including speaking to the owner about irrigation and other special equipment a property owner may have installed. Before you begin the installation process, you must complete a site survey. The major purpose of doing a site survey is to accomplish 5 crucial items. Number 1. To gather all important information regarding the event. Number 2. To ensure that proper equipment is specified for the event. Number 3. To organize the information so that it becomes meaningful for the success of the event. Number 4. To serve as a permanent record of the entire transaction. Number 5. To ensure all the codes and regulations are met for the event. Tools needed for assembly and installation of a 40-foot frame can include the following: a minimum of 1 6-foot stepladder. If you're on tall legs, using an 8 or 10-foot ladder may be best. You will need 2 pull ropes, each 75 foot long by 5/8 diameter, and a third pull rope of a smaller diameter for a return rope, a sledgehammer or powered driving equipment for driving tent stakes, general hand tools, a pair of keter feeders for fabric installation, a minimum of 2 jacks for a 40-foot by 40-foot, and 1 additional jack for each 15-foot or 20-foot middle sections, measuring tapes, layout strings, chalk or spray paint, and stake pullers for dismantling. Ground cloths to protect the tops during installation and dismantling. Don't forget your own personal protection equipment, such as hard hat, gloves, boots, and safety goggles. Whenever you're installing a tent frame, you always want to assemble the tent frame components, starting at one end and working to the other end. You never want to start in the middle. With the Olympic Maxi Tube system, once the roof portion of the frame is assembled and is sitting on the ground, there are 3 options for installing the fabric. The first and recommended installation method is to lift the frame, install the tent legs, and anchor the tent, and then install the fabric roof panels. The second option and more conventional method is to install the fabric panels with the roof frame on the ground and then lift the complete unit and install the legs. The third and final option is to install part of the fabric panels on the ground and the rest once you have the frame on its legs. We will be showing you some of these options in this video, but the focus is on installing the roof panels after the frame is on its legs. With gable end tents, the best and safest method is to install the gable end panels with the frame on the ground and then raise the frame and install all the roof panels in the air. Lay out in general size by measuring and marking the ground surface that the tent will be placed on. Make sure your layout is square. Establish which side of the tent frame is to be raised first, to have the tent located in the right position when finished. You must lay out and assemble the frame parts about 2 feet inside the first side you plan to raise. Now, lay out the maxi tubes and the connectors for the perimeter of the tent. Frames with maxi tube 4 1/16 tube and catenary tops require that the eave tubes be installed in the vertical position, making the lower track of the eave tube available for roller walls. It is important to note that early models of maxi tube and tops that strap on at the eaves will need to use the following procedures. Check all side perimeter maxi tubes to be sure they are positioned correctly to match the 26-degree roof pitch when installed. The tube must have a pinhole drilled through the score line on the upside of the tube. If the hole does not have a line through it, the eave tube is upside down and needs to be rotated 180 degrees. When installing this style of eave tube, use a 1/4-inch bail pin instead of a quick pin to avoid damaging the fabric. It is also equally important to mention that quick pins or bail pins need to face away from the direction the fabric will be pulled into the frame. The purpose is to eliminate any pin edges from catching on the fabric and damaging it. First, assemble the rafter sections on one gable end. Connect maxi tube rafter to the maxi track in crown. Slide both parts together and pin with a 3/8 bail pin. Assemble the other side in the same manner. Next, attach the gable corners to the end of the rafters and pin with a 3/8 bail pin. Install the gable end upright at the crown and bolt it in place with an eye bolt of the roof cable set. Insert the eye bolt through the plate and the gable end upright, fixing the two together. The eye bolt should be on the inside of the tent and in a horizontal position when complete. To complete the end rafter assembly, the last step is to add gable eave tubes.
Start by sliding the gable eave connector onto the upright and bolt it into place with a 3/8 by 3.5 inch long bolt and nut.
The connector is in the correct position when the arrow on the fitting is to the inside of the tent and pointing up. Slip the eave tubes onto this fitting first, then onto the corner connector and bolt both ends with a 3/8 by 2.5 inch long bolt and nut. The threads of the bolt should be to the inside of the tent. For the 40-foot wide tent, use the second hole out on the eave tube at the gable eave connector. At the corners, use a hole closest to the corner on the fitting. It will be necessary to move the rafters in and out to achieve this assembly. Connect the ridge to the rotating spigot on one side of the crown using a quick pin. It may require one person to hold up the end rafter to keep it from binding at the crown. The direction of this pin will determine which direction the fabric top will be pulled into the tent. Be consistent with the direction of this pin along the entire ridge. This part of the assembly is best done with a crew of 3 or more. Place the arch with the gable corners at the desired location. Pick up the arch and rotate it into the upright position.
Having 3 people makes this process a lot easier. One person on the ridge tube pushes, while the other 2 lift the arch starting near the middle and working out as the arch rotates into the upright position.
Take caution. Once the gable end arches upright, one person must steady it until the next step is complete. Attach the perimeter eave tubes of the frame consisting of maxi tubes in the appropriate size for the first bay width. Then pin with a quick pin or with a 1/4 inch bail pin. The pins along the eave tubes should always be pointing to the inside of the tent. The most common first bay is 15 foot wide, requiring a 14-4 maxi tube. Once the eave tube is on both gable corners, the frame should remain upright by itself, leaning into the direction of the rest of the tent assembly. Midsections typically come in 10, 15, and 20-foot sizes and may be different from bay to bay for the particular tent you are installing. For 10-foot midsections, use 9/4 tubes at the ridge and eaves. For 15-foot midsections, use 14/4 tubes, and for 20-foot midsections, use 19/4 tubes at the ridge and the eaves. If there are midsections in the tent being installed, the assembly of the second arch will generally be done lying away from the first arch in the direction that the tent is being assembled. Start with the maxi track 4-way crown and slide on one rafter. Pin with a 3/8 bail pin, install the second rafter, and pin. Next, install a brace bar between the rafters, sliding one end into the function slot and pinning with a 3/8 bail pin. Slide the other end into the opposite rafter and pin. This will require moving the rafter in and out until the holes line up for pinning. Now install the intermediate eave connectors in the ends of the rafters and pin with a 3/8 bail pin. Then install the 40-foot cross cable to the hitch rail of the intermediate eave connector with the shackle provided. An important note: if you are using scissor truss cables, install them now in place of the typical cross cable. Connect the short legs of the cable in the rafter holes below the brace bar using a 3/8 bail pin. Next, connect the other end of the cable to the hitch rail of the intermediate eave connector. And lastly, connect the final leg of the cable to the opposite side eave connector. It will be necessary to push the rafter ends inward to connect either the cross cables or the scissor truss cables. This is a desired preload. Because this is a second arch from either end, it will require a set of roof tension cables. Bolt the eye bolt of the 40-foot roof cable set into the crown lower plate, with the cables trailing in the direction of the gable end arch. The eye bolt should be in the horizontal position. When long frames of 5 or more middle bays are between the end bays, another roof cable set should be added, leaving no more than 4 consecutive bays without a roof cable. Install the next ridge tube on the crown of the arch you just assembled. Raising this arch is similar to the first, but you must be ready. This requires a ladder being placed where the second arch will top out. Raise the arch by hand as shown here. Working from a ladder, lift the ridge tube by the first arch and connect the tube to the crown of the second arch and pin it with a quick pin, noting the direction of the pin for pulling tops. Then connect the perimeter of the tent by sliding the intermediate eave connectors onto the maxi eave tubes and securing it with a quick pin or with a 1/4 bail pin. We will now secure the roof cables in the first bay. If needed, loosen the turnbuckle so that 1 or 2 inches of thread is showing on the inside of both ends of the turnbuckle, as shown. Connect the turnbuckle end of the roof cable to the hitch rail of the eave connector. Tighten the turnbuckle, adjusting it as you go to square the tent section. The squareness of the bay is observed from the side of the tent, looking at how vertical the arches appear. These roof cables are only the first and last bay, unless your tent is more than 6 bays long. Continue assembling, raising and attaching the midsection arches until complete. Depending on the size of your installing crew, you may gain some efficiency by having parts of your crew assemble the arches ahead of the other members who are attaching eave tubes. An alternate method of raising arches is shown here. Using this method, attach the eave tubes to the standing arch. Assemble the new arch on the ground with the peak pointing away from the previous arch, and the rafter ends against the standing arch. Attach the ridge tube to the crown fitting of the new arch. With 3 or more people, lift the peak of the newly assembled arch and connect the ridge tube coming off the standing arch to the crown fitting of the arch being lifted. Lift and walk the ends of the rafters away from the standing arch, lifting the new arch into position. Set the new arch down at the end of the installed eave tubes and attach them to the intermediate fittings with quick pins. This method of raising arches has the advantage of not requiring anyone to go up on a ladder to connect the ridge tube to the crown fitting. As you complete the frame, it will get stiffer and harder to connect. It may be necessary to stop and straighten and square the frame during installation. When all the midsections are finished, assemble the last gable end of the frame using the same steps and parts for the first arch assembly. Remember that the last bay in the tent structure needs to have a set of roof cables to provide stability in the roof plane. You may also choose to install a rafter end of the leg to rafter brace bar at this time, saving you 1 trip up the ladder and each leg if you wait to do it when the frame is off the ground. The end of the brace bar fits into the function slot of the rafter and pins with a 3/8 bail pin. Check all connections and fittings to be sure that the frame is ready to install the tent tops. This is also a good time to double check that all the quick pins are facing the same direction at the ridge into the inside of the eave tubes. This important step ensures that when fabric is installed, it will not catch on the pin or tear the fabric tops. Lay out the ground cover cloths to the outside of the gable end eave line of the tent. The cloth should be large enough to protect the entire width of the fabric panel being installed. We have found that a drop cloth that is 8 feet by 24 feet is an ideal size. Place the gable end infill panel on the ground cover and roll out 1/2 beside the tent frame. It is always easiest to install the gable end fabrics while the frame is on the ground. Gable end infill panels are 2 pieces with a typical tent lacer down the center. This must be closed after the panels are installed in the rafters. This will require 1 person to guide the fabric as it enters the rafter. The fabric can be pulled in by connecting a rope to the pole loop at the top corner of each panel and pulling it from a long angle. When both panels are in place, join the lacer down the center of the gable infill, closing the Velcro rain flap as you go. Repeat these steps at the other end of the tent. We recommend putting the roof panels on after the legs have been installed. We feel this method is safer because the crew will be lifting much less weight and the tent is less likely to catch wind during the lifting process. Preparation is very important at this time to ensure safe lifting. Install anchor points to hold down the tent while it is being raised. The minimum is 1 anchor point at each corner of the tent. Drive a tent stake out about 4 feet from the frame location and attach a tie-down strap or rope between the frame and the stake. Prior to lifting, you need to remember to pre-assemble the legs with the base plates and distribute them around the tent at needed points. When the leg is properly assembled, the function slot of the leg is to the inside of the tent, and the hitch rail of the base plate is to the outside of the tent. Legs are attached to the base plate with a 3/8 bail pin or a 3/8 by 2.5 inch bolt.
The keter cut out for the insertion of keter sidewall is about 36 inches up from the ground, and there should be 3 holes in the leg above this cutout.
Some installers leave the base plate permanently installed on the leg in order to save this assembly time. It is important to mention that before lifting the frame, you should install any special attachment needs for your event on the frame. This includes special pickup connectors for tent liners, lights, or other accessories that may be installed later. Trying to add these on a fully installed frame requires a use of tall ladders and is potentially unsafe. For safety reasons, remember that the wind conditions can and will lift the entire tent. Proceed with extreme caution and always lift the tent surface into the wind stream.